Hello, I am your Rusame reader, Crowsong, and today I will be reading to you from Royal Guard by Muriel. Now, on to Chapter 5, Library. The sun peeked through the mountains of Britannia. It enveloped the entire kingdom in a warm orange color. The chatter of the town slowly got louder and louder as the day began. The windows of the castle flew open, the chirps of birds heard in every corner, and the crisp air filling the prince's lungs. He walked out of the dining room, his personal guard waiting outside of the large marble doors, ready to start his day as well. "What lessons do you have today, Prince?" He followed the trudging American. "I don't have lessons today. I have free days at least once a week, sometimes more," he replied as he yawned out of sleepiness. The young royal's eyelids still felt heavy. "But unfortunately for me, I have a language test tomorrow on 10 different languages." He groaned in annoyance. "So I must use my free day to study. That's why." The prince whipped around to face his guard. They both halted, coming to a stop. "We're going to the library today," he enthusiastically cheered. Not because he liked going to the library, but because he was excited to show his guard around the library. The large marble doors swung open to reveal a large and tall room with bookshelves at every corner, filled with books to the brim. The library's end could not be seen. There was a ladder that attached to the extremely tall bookshelves in one section. The Russian stared in awe. He had never experienced how a royal's life would be like, so it was natural for him to be interested, though it was still unnatural how interest gleamed in his eyes. Russia had almost never shown interest in anything, in the prince's eyes at least. They walked down the hallway of the library. More bookshelves revealed themselves. America suddenly ducked in between the bookshelves. His guard was too distracted to notice or stop him fast enough. He was a second late in his reaction. Russia whipped his head around, alarmed, trying to spot the missing country. "Boo!" America's head popped out from one of the corners of a bookshelf. America started giggling. The Russian flinched a little. Then the prince dove again into the abundance of books. The guard scanned the room again in a very composed manner. He wasn't panicking. His face was still in the same expression he always had. "Peekaboo!" The prince jumped out, removing his hands from his face as he did. He had a bright smile plastered on his face. He had his hand on the side of his face. The guard stood there, unmoved. When the prince noticed, his smile was replaced with a frown instead. He clicked his tongue in disappointment. True, what the prince did was quite amusing to his guard. He had never seen anyone so carefree and fun, but it wasn't enough to make him lose his composure and smile. "Your pretty face will be ruined if you don't smile, you know?" The American sighed and just continued to walk again. Eventually, they found themselves at a small area with a table and 4 fancy-looking chairs around it. "This seating area is right next to the language section. I always go here to study for my language shit." He grabbed a stack of books that was right next to the table and plopped them down effortlessly. "It's kinda awkward if you keep staring at me while I study. How about you go find a book to read or something? I'm sure there's something here. He sat down and opened his first book. Russia nodded obediently and left to go find himself a book. He scanned the bookshelves for what seemed like ages due to how large the library itself was. He knocked down a few piles of books on accident when he turned a corner. Russia immediately bent down to fix it. When he picked up a specific book, a picture slipped out of it. It was a fairly old picture of a young boy and a taller, older boy. They stood next to each other, posing for the photo. The young boy seemed to be the king when he was younger. The other boy's head was torn off, so the guard could not distinguish who it was. When he snapped out of it, he realized he had been staring at the picture for the past few minutes or so. He slipped the picture into his pocket without thinking. He then analyzed the book it fell out of. It was an old, sorrowful tale about two children's lives. He recognized the book from somewhere, somehow. Without thinking, he just decided to grab that book along with two others and then head back to the prince. Unfortunately for the Russian, he'd gotten lost. The library was just so enormous that he had lost all of his sense of direction. All the corners looked the same to him, filled to the brim with books. After maybe 2 hours of skittering around like a rat, he gave up and just sat down on the floor. He pressed his back against a bookshelf and flipped open his book. Page by page, word by word, the guard carefully read. He ended up so engrossed in the book that he had lost track of time. When he finally finished the book, he estimated the time was around 1 or 2 in the afternoon, which means he has been reading that book for a good 2 to 4 hours. He really liked that book. He didn't want to lose it in the library again, so for now he brought it along with him as he searched for the prince again. After hours, he finally found the table. There was the prince, sleeping with his head on the side of the table. An open book covered his face, another open book beneath his arms and head. The guard walked over. There was only one table and 4 chairs were surrounding it from every side. The guard sat on the one next to the prince. His face wasn't visible due to it being covered by the book. His hair was a mess. It looked extremely fluffy, though, which tempted the guard. Stop. Don't do it. It's disrespectful, Russia. What are you doing? He repeated in his head. Despite his best efforts, he gave in. He placed the book gently on the table, careful not to wake the prince up. His hair looks so fluffy. I'm extremely tempted to touch it. He internally sighed. He placed his hand into the American's hair and ruffled it a little. It was extremely fluffy indeed. His cheeks turned a slight shade of red as he watched the prince carefully. He traced the strands of hair from his head, placing his hand on the side of the prince's face, tracing his thumb around the prince's cheeks. He just sat there, watching the prince carefully with his hand rubbing on the side of the prince's face. After a good few minutes of ruffling and placing his hand on the back of the prince's cheek, he flinched and pulled his hand back. What am I doing? He seemed disappointed in himself, but yet he enjoyed it more than he needed to, which made him question himself more. He inserted his hand into his hat and ran his hand through his hair. His eyes fell to the book covering America's face. He slowly moved his hand towards it to remove it. Just before gripping it, a pile of books tumbled over. Russia got up and bent over to the fallen pile of books next to the prince to fix it. Little did he know that the books falling was not an accident. The prince had knocked them down over with his foot because he was never asleep in the first place. Under the book that covered his face, he was as red as a tomato. If Russia were to remove the book, it would be embarrassing with his tomato red face. The royal had to think of something quickly. The first thing that came to mind was to knock over the pile of books next to him. The American then pretended to get up, rubbing his eyes and fake yawning. "Oh, hello, Russia. I must have fallen asleep." He tried his best to act. The prince had never thought his acting lessons would be useful. Well, that was until now. A pile of books fell over. I'm just picking it up. The Russian's face was still unchanged. "Ah, I see." He gave a nervous chuckle at the end of the sentence. The prince's eyes fell on the book on the table where Russia was sitting. "Do you like that book?" "I do. I found it in a pile," the Russian nonchalantly replied as he finished and rose again. "You can borrow it if you like." "That is unnecessary," the guard tried to refuse. "I insist. It's an order." The shorter country raised his authority. "Okay," the Russian said obediently. He averted his gaze, unable to look the prince in the eyes. "Let's leave. I'm just about done. I'm gonna stay in my room for the rest of the day. You can take a break." "That's an order." "Yes, Prince." He gave a slight bow. As the prince cleaned up the messy books on the table, one question swirled in his mind. Why did I enjoy that so much? His heart was beating so fast at the moment. The prince had never felt anything like it before. America couldn't stand seeing his beautiful amber eyes right now, the same ones that watched him so very carefully. He gently placed a hand where the Russian had touched before, on the side of his face, a grin forming on his face. I want to experience this feeling again. And that is the end of this chapter. God, I love these two gay idiots. That may be the end of this video, but you can talk to me on the Discord. Yes, we do have a voice channel, and I'm pretty sure that two of us have confused the rest of the server effectively just by sending whatever we're talking on voice chat. You can come hang out with us. It's pretty fun. Also, if you're on the server and you're seeing this, now you understand the crazy stuff that shows up in general sometimes. Or art, because we do have an art chit-chat area.